On the night she was thrown out, it was raining. Not the gentle kind of rain that softened the air or cooled the ground. This rain fell hard and cold, heavy enough to soak through clothes in seconds, clinging to skin like it had weight. It blurred the lights, muffled sound, and made every step feel slower than the last. Lin Yao stood outside the iron gates of the Chen family estate, motionless, as if her body hadn't yet accepted what had just happened. She wore a thin coat that did little to block the cold. In her hand was a small bag. From a distance, it might have looked like she was prepared, like she had planned this. She hadn't. Inside the bag were a few folded clothes, a worn wallet with no cash, and an old phone with a cracked screen. She didn't bother turning it on. There was no one to call, no place to go back to. Everything else had already been taken. The jewelry she wore during the marriage was removed carefully, as if it had never belonged to her. The credit card tied to the family account was canceled without explanation. Even the small gifts she had brought into the house years ago were counted, examined, and set aside. Nothing was left by accident. She had entered that house as a wife. She left as if she had never existed. The words spoken to her still echoed in her ears, sharp and clean, delivered without hesitation or anger. "You're no longer part of this family. Don't come back. Don't embarrass us again." There was no shouting, no dramatic argument, no final discussion, just a decision that had already been made. Lin Yao didn't argue. She didn't ask why. She didn't beg. She stood there quietly, rain dripping from her hair, water sliding down the sleeves of her coat, hands clenched so tightly at her sides that her fingers ached. For a moment, she thought she might collapse right there in front of the gates. But she didn't. She bowed once, slowly, properly, the way she had been taught since she was young, the way she had bowed every time she swallowed her pride, every time she reminded herself to endure. Then she turned around and walked away. Behind her, the gates closed with a dull, final sound. From the balcony above, the lights inside the house stayed on, warm, bright, safe. Dinner continued. She could hear faint laughter drifting through the rain, carried by the wind like it belonged to another world. No one followed her. Not her husband, not a family member, not even a servant pretending to care. Lin Yao walked until her shoes were soaked through and her feet went numb. The street stretched out in front of her, empty and unfamiliar. Each step took her farther away from the only place she had called home for years. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. When she finally reached a quiet bus stop, she sat beneath the narrow roof and hugged her knees to her chest. The rain hit the pavement in uneven rhythms, splashing close enough that her clothes never fully dried. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping over her for a brief second before disappearing again. No one slowed down. She stared at the road ahead, eyes unfocused, thoughts heavy and scattered. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, ended in less than an hour. That realization settled slowly. That night, she didn't cry loudly. She cried carefully, silently, pressing her face into her sleeve so no sound escaped. Even her tears felt like something she couldn't afford to waste. Before exhaustion finally pulled her under, Lin Yao told herself one thing. Remember this night. Remember the rain. Remember the closed gate. Remember how easy it was for them to erase you, because no one else would remember it for her. And one day she would need to remember exactly how this felt.
From the very beginning, Lin Yao knew she did not belong in the Chen family. She didn't realize it all at once, There was no single moment that made it clear. It was something she understood gradually, in small, quiet ways that were easy to dismiss at first. The marriage had never been about love. It was an agreement, carefully arranged and politely discussed. The Chen family needed a daughter-in-law who would not cause trouble, someone obedient, someone grateful for the opportunity, someone who understood her place. Lin Yao needed stability. She told herself that was enough. When she first entered the house, she believed effort could change things, that respect could be earned, that if she was patient, careful, and considerate, the distance between her and the family would eventually close. So she tried. She woke before dawn every day, long before the house stirred. She learned everyone's routines without being asked. She memorized preferences, habits, and tempers. Who preferred silence in the morning, who complained if dinner was late, which topics were safe and which ones led to cold stares. She learned when to speak and when silence was safer. When her cooking was criticized, she changed the recipe without complaint. When her background was mentioned with thinly veiled disdain, she lowered her head. When relatives ignored her presence at gatherings, she stood a little farther back. She told herself this was normal, that all families had adjustments, that time would soften sharp edges. But time did not soften anything. It sharpened expectations. The more she endured, the more they expected her to endure. Her patience became invisible. Her silence became permission. Her husband rarely spoke to her. When he did, his words were brief and distant, as if he were addressing a stranger rather than a wife. She told herself he was busy, that work consumed him, that marriage took time. She waited. She waited through missed meals, unanswered questions, and long evenings spent alone in a house full of people. She waited through family dinners where conversations flowed around her but never included her. Slowly, she stopped waiting for warmth. The first time they suggested she leave the house for a while, it was framed as concern. Maybe some distance would help. Maybe she should stay elsewhere temporarily. It would be better for everyone. She agreed, not because she wanted to, but because she believed cooperation would prove her value. The second time, the suggestion became an expectation. The third time, it was no longer disguised. Each time, she returned quieter than before. She began to understand something she had avoided admitting. No matter how carefully she behaved, she would never be one of them. She was tolerated, convenient, replaceable. Still, she stayed, because leaving felt like failure, because she had nowhere else to go, because part of her believed that if she tried just a little harder, something would change. It never did. By the time the family decided she was no longer useful, Lin Yao had already spent years making herself small. And when they finally pushed her out, they did not feel cruel. They felt justified, because to them, she had never truly belonged in the first place. The night everything ended did not begin with anger. It began like any other gathering. The Chen family home was bright, filled with voices and movement. Relatives arrived dressed neatly, laughter echoing softly through the halls. Tea was poured, plates were arranged. The air carried the faint warmth of a house that had never known uncertainty. Lin Yao stood near the edge of the living room, exactly where she always stood. Not invited into the center of conversations, not asked to sit, just close enough to be present, far enough to be ignored. She had learned that position well. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Conversations overlapped. Someone spoke about business. Another joked about social obligations. The evening moved forward with practiced ease. Then, the topic shifted. It happened casually, as if no one had planned it. A comment about reputation, a remark about appearances, a pause that lasted just long enough to draw attention toward her. Eyes turned. Not all at once, not dramatically. One by one, Lin Yao felt it before she fully understood it, that familiar tightening in her chest, the instinctive urge to straighten her posture, to prepare herself for whatever was coming. The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. They spoke about her as if she were not standing there, as if she were a problem to be discussed, rather than a person to be addressed. They said she was unsuitable. They said she brought no benefit to the family. They said it was time to end things. Each sentence landed quietly, cleanly, without hesitation. No one objected. No one interrupted. Some nodded, others sipped tea, eyes lowered, as if this decision had already been accepted long before it was spoken aloud. Lin Yao stood still. She waited for someone to speak up, for a voice to question the timing, for someone to suggest privacy, for anyone to acknowledge her presence. Her gaze drifted toward her husband. He stood among them, hands at his sides, expression unreadable. His eyes did not meet hers, not even for a moment. He looked past her. In that instant, something inside her shifted. It wasn't shock, it wasn't even anger, it was clarity. She understood then that no explanation would come, that no defense existed, that whatever bond she thought they shared had never truly been there. The discussion ended as easily as it began. Someone stood, others followed, the room loosened, conversation returning to safer topics as if nothing significant had happened. Lin Yao was dismissed without ceremony. She went to the room she slept in and packed quietly. Each item she picked up felt strangely distant, like it belonged to someone else. Clothes folded, personal belongings gathered. Everything else was left behind. There was no rush. No one checked on her. She carried her small bag to the door and paused. For a moment, she considered saying something, not to argue, not to plead, just to mark the end of it, to let them hear her voice one last time. But no one was looking at her. The silence answered for them. She stepped outside. The door closed. The sound was soft, but final. The rain greeted her immediately, cold against her skin, blurring the lights behind her. She stood there for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the house continuing without her. Dinner resumed, conversations flowed, laughter returned. It was as if she had already been erased. Lin Yao walked away slowly, each step measured. Her legs felt heavy, but she kept going. She did not look back. Not because she was strong, but because she knew there was nothing left to see. That night, as she moved farther from the house, the reality settled in fully for the first time. She had not been divorced. She had not been argued with. She had been removed, discarded without struggle. And the quiet way it happened hurt more than any shouting ever could. By the time she reached the end of the street, the rain had soaked through her clothes completely. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the weight of what had been taken from her without resistance. She did not know what would come next, only that whatever came, she would face it alone. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and disbelief, a single truth began to form. If she could be erased this easily, then she would have to rebuild herself in a way no one could ever erase again. The first year after Lin Yao was thrown out did not feel like a year. It felt like a long, unbroken stretch of days that all blurred together, marked only by exhaustion and quiet endurance. Time stopped moving forward in any meaningful way. It only passed. At first, she told herself the situation was temporary. That thought helped her get through the earliest days. It gave her something to hold on to when she walked through unfamiliar streets or stared at listings she could barely afford. Temporary meant survivable. Temporary meant there was still a direction. But days became weeks. Weeks became months. And nothing changed. She moved from place to place, wherever she could stay the longest without being asked to leave.
Small rented rooms with thin walls, shared apartments where no one asked questions, spaces that never felt like hers. Some nights, she lay awake listening to strangers breathe on the other side of the wall. Other nights, she slept fully clothed, afraid of oversleeping and missing work. Privacy became a luxury she no longer expected. She learned to live lightly, to keep her belongings limited to what she could carry, to never settle too deeply into any one place. Work filled most of her time. She took whatever jobs were available, cleaning offices before sunrise when the city still felt half asleep, filing documents for companies that barely noticed her presence, night shifts that stretched endlessly, leaving her body exhausted and her mind fogged. Her hands grew rough, her shoulders ached constantly, her feet hurt in ways she didn't know how to describe. Still, she showed up, because not showing up meant something worse. There were days she forgot to eat properly, nights she counted the remaining money in her wallet again and again, as if the number might change if she stared at it long enough. Sometimes when she passed reflective windows or dark screens, she barely recognized herself. Her face looked thinner, her eyes sharper but emptier. The softness she once carried had faded, replaced by something harder and quieter. She didn't feel angry. Anger required energy. Most days, she felt nothing at all. The loneliness was the hardest part. Not the absence of people, but the absence of being seen. She could stand in a crowded train car and feel completely alone. She could work beside others for hours without exchanging a single word. No one asked where she came from. No one asked where she was going. No one cared enough to ask anything. At night, when the city finally went quiet, the memories returned. The house, the lights, the closed gate. She replayed the night she was thrown out over and over again, as if her mind were trying to find the moment where things could have gone differently. There wasn't one. That realization settled slowly, painfully. Some nights, the weight became too much. She would sit on the edge of her bed, face pressed into her hands, and cry without sound. She cried carefully, the way she did everything now, as if even her tears needed to be controlled. She didn't cry because she wanted to go back. She cried because she had nowhere to go forward yet. There were moments when she thought about giving up, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, just quietly wondering how much longer she could keep living like this. What stopped her was not hope. It was stubbornness, a refusal to disappear completely. She told herself that if she endured long enough, something would change, not because the world was kind, but because nothing stayed the same forever. By the end of the first year, Lin Yao was no longer the woman who had walked out into the rain. She had learned to endure hunger without complaint, how to accept exhaustion as normal, how to exist without expectation. She stopped thinking about fairness. She stopped waiting for apologies. She stopped hoping someone would come looking for her. And somewhere in that long, difficult year, something inside her hardened, not into bitterness, into resolve. She survived the year with nothing, and without realizing it yet, survival had begun to prepare her for something else, something harder, something stronger.
After the first year, something inside Lin Yao changed. The panic faded first. The constant fear that she was about to lose everything quieted into something dull and manageable. The world did not become kinder, but it became predictable, and predictability brought a strange kind of calm. She stopped reacting to every hardship as if it were an emergency. She adapted. Lin Yao learned how to disappear. Not in a dramatic way. There was no decision, no clear moment where she chose it. It happened gradually, shaped by necessity and reinforced by experience. She spoke only when necessary. When asked a question, she answered clearly and briefly. When not asked, she remained silent. Silence had become familiar, safe. She watched more than she talked. At work, she listened carefully to conversations that were never meant for her, complaints, arguments, small decisions made casually that later caused larger problems. She remembered all of it. People rarely noticed her presence, and because of that, they spoke freely. At first, being overlooked hurt. It reminded her of the Chen family, of standing at the edge of rooms, present but unseen. But over time, she realized something important. Invisibility had advantages. No one questioned her motives. No one competed with her. No one felt threatened. She was free to observe without interruption. When mistakes happened, she fixed them quietly. She didn't announce solutions or seek praise. She simply made sure problems were resolved before they became visible. When tasks were unclear, she clarified them on her own. When instructions were incomplete, she filled in the gaps. She became reliable in a way that didn't attract attention, but built trust slowly. Her supervisors began to rely on her without consciously realizing it. If something needed to be done properly, it somehow ended up with Lin Yao. She stayed late without being asked, came in early without complaint, not because she wanted recognition, but because work gave her structure when everything else felt uncertain. At night, she reviewed what she had learned, processes, systems, patterns. She didn't yet know why she was learning these things, only that understanding gave her a sense of control she had lacked for a long time. She stopped thinking of herself as unlucky. She began thinking of herself as prepared. There were still lonely moments. On crowded buses, she watched families sit together, speaking softly to one another, and felt a quiet ache she had learned not to acknowledge. In restaurants, she noticed couples sharing meals, unaware of how fortunate they were to be seen by someone else. She no longer felt envy, only distance. Slowly, her emotions became contained, not numb, but disciplined. She learned how to hold them in place so they wouldn't interfere with what needed to be done. People described her as quiet, efficient, dependable. They did not describe her as ambitious. That suited her. Ambition drew attention. Attention invited interference. Lin Yao continued working in the background, building skills she didn't yet know she would need. She learned how decisions were made, how authority functioned, how small choices shaped larger outcomes. By the time others began to notice her competence, she was already several steps ahead. She had changed. Not outwardly, not in ways that invited comment, but inwardly, the woman who had once believed endurance meant obedience was gone. In her place was someone who understood patience as strategy. She was still invisible, but invisibility was no longer weakness, it was protection. And quietly, without announcement or recognition, Lin Yao was preparing herself for a life where she would never again be dismissed so easily. The first turning point did not arrive with celebration. There was no announcement, no sudden recognition, no moment where Lin Yao felt her life visibly change. It came quietly, the way most important things do. By then, she had settled into a routine that felt almost permanent. Work, commute, sleep, repeat. Her days were predictable, her movements efficient, her expectations low. She did not dream anymore. Dreaming required energy she preferred to save. It was during an ordinary workday that someone noticed her, not because she asked to be noticed, not because she stood out, but because something small went wrong and she fixed it before anyone else realized it had happened. A report had errors, she corrected them. A process was unclear, she clarified it. A deadline was at risk, she adjusted quietly. When her supervisor asked who handled it, her name surfaced naturally, without emphasis. Lin Yao. The sound of it felt strange to her, spoken aloud in that setting. as if it belonged to someone else. Later that week, she was called into a small meeting room, not formally, not urgently, just a brief conversation. There was a project that needed attention, one that others had dismissed as inconvenient, too much detail, too little visibility, no immediate reward. She listened carefully. She nodded. She accepted. Not because it sounded important, but because she understood something others didn't. Small projects reveal everything. They show how people think when no one is watching. She approached the work the same way she approached everything now, quietly, thoroughly, without expectation. She read every document twice, asked questions when necessary, took notes no one asked for. She stayed late, not to impress anyone, but because leaving things unfinished made her uneasy. At home, she reviewed the material again. She didn't yet know why she cared so much, only that something about this work felt different. It wasn't just labor, it was learning. She began to see patterns where inefficiencies hid, how decisions were delayed, where assumptions replaced understanding. The more she understood, the more control she felt. That feeling was unfamiliar and addictive. Weeks passed. The project moved forward steadily, not dramatically, just smoothly. Problems were resolved before they escalated. Delays were prevented before they formed. No one applauded, but no one complained either. When the project concluded successfully, it ended the way it began, quietly. Except this time, something lingered. People remembered who had handled it. Her supervisor began to ask for her input more often, not formally, just casually. A question here, a confirmation there. Lin Yao answered honestly, directly, without embellishment. She didn't realize it yet, but trust was forming. That realization came later one evening as she sat alone reviewing notes from the day. She paused, pen hovering above the page, and noticed something unfamiliar. Confidence. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demanded attention. A calm certainty that she could handle what was placed in front of her. She thought back to the woman who had stood in the rain outside the Chen family gates. The woman believed survival was the limit of her ability. That version of herself felt distant now, not gone, but changed. She didn't celebrate this realization. She didn't allow herself optimism. Hope had once made her careless. Instead, she made a decision. If opportunity appeared again, she would be ready. She began preparing in ways no one noticed. She studied processes outside her immediate role, paid attention to how decisions moved through the organization, learned who influenced outcomes and who only pretended to. She didn't rush. She didn't tell anyone. She worked quietly, steadily, building something invisible. This turning point did not lift her out of difficulty overnight. Her days were still long, her apartment was still small, her future still uncertain, but direction had replaced drift. She was no longer merely enduring time, she was using it. And for the first time since she was thrown out into the rain, Lin Yao felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope, control. After the first turning point, Lin Yao did not change her behavior. At least, not in any obvious way. She still arrived early, still left late, still spoke only when necessary. To anyone watching casually, she was the same quiet employee she had always been. But beneath that surface, everything had shifted. She no longer worked blindly. She worked with awareness. Tasks were no longer just tasks. They were pieces of a larger system. She began to understand how one decision affected another, how delays created pressure elsewhere, how small inefficiencies multiplied over time. She noticed patterns others ignored. Who spoke the loudest in meetings but contributed the least? who never raised their voice but quietly decided outcomes, who took credit, who avoided responsibility. She didn't judge, she observed. When new work came her way, she accepted it without comment. She completed it thoroughly, consistently, and on time. Not dramatically, not impressively, reliably. That reliability began to matter. When deadlines tightened, her name came up. When problems surfaced, someone asked if Lin Yao could take a look. When confusion spread, she was asked for clarification. She did not react with pride. She reacted with precision. She answered questions clearly, offered solutions only when she was sure. She never exaggerated her capabilities, never promised more than she could deliver. That restraint made people trust her even more. Gradually, without announcement, her role expanded. She wasn't promoted yet, not officially, but more responsibility found its way to her desk. She handled information others didn't see. She was included in discussions she hadn't been invited to before. She listened carefully. She spoke carefully. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Competence, when displayed quietly, unsettles people. Some began to notice her differently. A few coworkers grew cautious. Others grew dependent. Some didn't like her but couldn't explain why. She didn't confront any of it. She kept working. Outside of work, her life remained simple. Her apartment was still small, her routines unchanged, but something had shifted even there. She stood differently. She no longer walked with her shoulders slightly hunched. She no longer avoided eye contact without realizing it. The woman who once tried to disappear had learned when invisibility was useful and when presence mattered. She still didn't seek attention, but she no longer shrank from it either. There were moments, small and fleeting, when she caught herself making decisions without second-guessing them. Moments when she trusted her own judgment instinctively. Those moments stayed with her. They built on each other. By the time others began to describe her as capable, she had already moved past needing the label. Capability had become her baseline. She remembered the Chen family occasionally, not with longing, with clarity. She understood now why she had failed there, not because she lacked value, but because she believed value came from obedience. Here, competence spoke louder, and she was learning to let it speak for her. One evening, as she finished reviewing a set of documents and shut down her computer, Lin Yao paused. The office around her was quiet. Lights dimmed, desks empty. She realized something then. People trusted her. Not because she demanded it, not because she asked for it, but because she earned it consistently, without spectacle. That trust gave her leverage. She didn't use it yet. She simply acknowledged it. And in doing so, she took another step forward. Quiet competence had carried her this far. Soon, it would carry her further. By the third year, Lin Yao's life no longer resembled the one she had been living before. The change did not happen overnight. There was no sudden promotion that transformed everything at once, no dramatic announcement that marked the moment she became important. Instead, the shift revealed itself through how people behaved around her. She noticed it first in meetings. People waited for her to finish speaking before responding. Questions were directed toward her instead of around her. When disagreements arose, eyes turned in her direction, expecting a conclusion. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She listened, considered, and then spoke. And when she did, decisions followed. Her role had expanded quietly over time, but now it was undeniable. She was entrusted with projects that affected more than just her department. Decisions she made carried weight beyond her immediate responsibilities. She was no longer merely executing plans, she was shaping them. Her schedule changed. Meetings filled her calendar. Her inbox carried conversations marked urgent. People who had once overlooked her now made time for her. She adjusted without comment. Authority did not excite her. It grounded her.
Outside the office, signs of change appeared as well. She moved into a better apartment. Not extravagant, just comfortable, a place where she could breathe without counting every expense, where silence felt like rest instead of loneliness. Her wardrobe shifted, not toward luxury, but intention. Clean lines, neutral colors, clothes chosen for function and presence rather than disguise. She walked differently now, not faster, not slower, steadier. The woman who once avoided attention had learned how to carry it. Her colleagues spoke about her with respect, not admiration. Respect was quieter, more durable. They described her as reliable, decisive, difficult to replace. Some admired her, some resented her, some tried to imitate her. She noticed all of it. She reacted to none of it. Power, she understood now, was not about dominance, it was about influence, and she had it. The company began expanding during that third year, strategic moves, careful acquisitions, decisions that looked conservative from the outside but proved effective over time. Lin Yao was involved in all of them, not as a figurehead, as a strategist. She reviewed proposals others skimmed, asked questions others avoided, considered risks others ignored. Her caution saved resources, her insight opened doors. People listened, trust deepened. There were moments when she caught her reflection in glass doors or elevator mirrors and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face was calmer now, her eyes clear. The tension she once carried constantly had eased. She remembered the night she stood in the rain outside the Chen family gates. The memory no longer hurt. It felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Not because it didn't matter, but because she had moved beyond it. Lin Yao no longer asked for permission. She didn't wait to be chosen. She made decisions and accepted the consequences of them. That was the difference. That was power. By the end of the third year, her name carried weight in rooms she had never imagined entering, not loudly, not publicly, but when it was mentioned, people paid attention. She had become someone others needed to consider, someone whose absence would be noticed. She was no longer small, and she did not need anyone to acknowledge it for it to be true.
While Lin Yao's world was stabilizing, the Chen families began to shift in ways they did not immediately recognize. At first, the changes were subtle enough to ignore. A partnership that had always renewed without question suddenly stalled. A supplier hesitated. A project that was expected to move smoothly encountered delays that no one could quite explain. The Chen family dismissed these issues easily. Markets fluctuate, trends change, timing matters. They had weathered difficulty before. This felt no different. But as weeks passed, patterns emerged. Decisions that once produced predictable results now led to uncertainty. Meetings ended without resolution. Conversations that had always flowed confidently now circled the same problems without progress. Mr. Chen began to notice the silence first. Phone calls that were not returned promptly, messages acknowledged without enthusiasm, invitations that arrived later than usual, if they arrived at all. Nothing was openly withdrawn, nothing was openly denied, and that made it harder to confront. Inside the company, tension grew quietly. Departments blamed one another, managers avoided responsibility. Employees sensed instability and began to protect themselves. Mr. Chen called more meetings. He spoke more firmly, but authority, once questioned, rarely regains its shape easily. They told themselves the issues were temporary. They told themselves they were still respected. They did not yet realize that respect had shifted elsewhere. A deal fell through unexpectedly, not because negotiations failed, but because the other party changed direction at the last moment. Another opportunity dissolved before contracts were finalized. Excuses piled up, external factors, regulatory concerns, unexpected risks. But the explanations began to sound thin, even to those repeating them. Mrs. Chen noticed the change in atmosphere before her husband did.
She noticed how people avoided eye contact during meetings, how smiles felt strained, how conversations ended too quickly. She felt something familiar but unwelcome, unease, the kind that comes when control begins to slip. The family tried to adapt. They adjusted strategies, replaced advisors, pressured subordinates to produce answers. But pressure did not create clarity, it created fear, and fear spread faster than solutions. At home, conversations grew shorter, meals quieter. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something was wrong. Mr. Chen reviewed reports late into the night, numbers blurring together. He told himself he was tired, that he needed rest, that tomorrow would bring perspective. It didn't. Each morning brought new complications. Each evening ended without resolution. The company was not collapsing, it was eroding, slowly, relentlessly, and because the decline was gradual, it was harder to stop. They began reaching out. Old contacts, familiar partners, people who had once responded eagerly. Responses came back polite but distant. Promises replaced commitments. We'll revisit this later. Let's see how things develop. Now may not be the right time. The Chen family still had assets, still had influence, still had a name, but the confidence surrounding that name had weakened. They did not yet understand why. They did not yet see the full picture. They only felt the pressure tightening around them day by day. Mr. Chen sat in his office one evening, staring at the city lights outside his window, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time: uncertainty. He had always believed control was something that could be asserted, that experience and authority were enough to guide outcomes. Now, outcomes no longer followed expectations, and somewhere beneath the frustration and denial, a question began to form. Who was influencing these shifts? The answer had not yet reached him, but it was closer than he realized. The Chen family was beginning to fall, not loudly, not publicly, but in ways that could not be undone once they took hold. And while they struggled to understand what was happening to them, Lin Yao continued moving forward, untouched by their growing instability. The distance between them was narrowing, even if they did not yet know it.
The first time Mr. Chen heard her name again, it was spoken casually, almost carelessly. He was seated in a conference room, listening to a routine discussion about potential partnerships. The meeting had already gone on longer than planned. Voices blended together. Points repeated themselves. He wasn't paying full attention. Then someone mentioned a name: Lin Yao. The sound of it cut through the room with unexpected clarity. For a brief moment, the conversation paused, not because anyone else noticed the shift, but because Mr. Chen did. His hand tightened around the pen he was holding, the movement small but instinctive. He did not react outwardly. He waited. The discussion continued. Someone described her as difficult. Another called her effective. The words were measured, professional, stripped of emotion. There was no hesitation in how they spoke of her, no doubt. Mr. Chen said nothing, but inside, something unsettled. The name should not have mattered. There were countless people in the industry, countless professionals whose names surfaced and disappeared every day. Yet this one lingered. He told himself it was coincidence, that names repeat, that memory was playing tricks on him. Still, the feeling remained: unease. Later that day, he asked quietly about the person mentioned in the meeting, not directly, not obviously, just enough to gather information without revealing interest. The answers were vague but consistent. She was competent. She was involved in key decisions. She had influence beyond her title. No one elaborated further. No one needed to. That night, Mr. Chen returned home restless. He found himself thinking back to the past without intending to the woman who had once lived in his house, the quiet daughter-in-law who rarely spoke and never caused trouble. The connection felt wrong, impossible. And yet, the name matched. Lin Yao. He dismissed the thought. That woman had left with nothing. No support, no background, no resources. She had disappeared into obscurity. This woman was clearly someone else. And still, the unease deepened. Over the following weeks, the name surfaced again, in reports, in meetings, in conversations he overheard but was not part of. Each time it carried the same weight: competent, strategic, reliable. No one spoke of her with hesitation. That was what frightened him most. He began to look more closely. He reviewed documents more carefully, noted patterns, tracked where decisions shifted unexpectedly. Slowly, a picture formed. Projects the Chen family had lost intersected with projects she had influenced. Partnerships that withdrew aligned with areas she had reviewed. There were no clear lines to draw, only overlapping shadows. Mr. Chen did not accuse. He could not. There was nothing to accuse. But denial became impossible. He remembered the night Lin Yao was thrown out, the rain, the silence, the way he had chosen not to intervene. At the time, it had felt insignificant, necessary. Now, the memory carried weight. He wondered if she remembered that night. The thought unsettled him. Mrs. Chen noticed the change in her husband, his distraction, his shortened temper, his habit of staring at nothing long after conversations ended. When she asked what was wrong, he dismissed it, but the question lingered. One evening, alone in his study, Mr. Chen said the name aloud, Lin Yao. Hearing it in the quiet made it feel real. For the first time, he considered the possibility he had avoided, that the woman he dismissed as replaceable had not disappeared, that she had adapted, that she had grown, and that the distance between them was not as great as he once believed. The realization did not bring fear immediately. It brought something worse: regret. Not for what he had done, but for the consequences he had underestimated. Because if Lin Yao was truly the same person he had once known, then the shifts happening around him were not random. They were deliberate. And for the first time, Mr. Chen understood that the past he thought he had closed had not stayed buried. It had returned, quietly, and it was watching him now.
The conference took place in a hotel ballroom filled with light. Glass walls reflected the city outside, bright and distant. Inside, the atmosphere was polished and formal, shaped by careful planning and practiced confidence. Conversations overlapped in controlled tones. Laughter rose and fell without warmth. This was familiar territory for the Chen family, or at least it used to be. Mr. Chen arrived early, as he always did. He moved through the room greeting familiar faces, accepting nods and polite smiles. Everything appeared normal on the surface, and yet something felt different. He was waiting. He did not know for what. Then she arrived. Lin Yao entered the room without ceremony. There was no dramatic pause, no announcement that drew attention to her presence. She simply walked in, unhurried, composed, and entirely at ease. At first, no one reacted. Then people noticed. Conversations slowed, eyes shifted. A subtle recalibration moved through the room as those who recognized her adjusted their posture, their tone, their focus. Mr. Chen saw it happen. He followed the direction of their attention, and then he saw her. For a moment, he did not recognize her. Not fully. The woman standing across the room bore little resemblance to the quiet figure who once stood at the edge of his living room. This Lin Yao stood straight, shoulders relaxed, expression calm. Her presence did not demand attention, but it held it. She was surrounded by people who deferred to her naturally, not out of obligation, out of habit. She spoke briefly, listened carefully, nodded once, and others adjusted their plans accordingly. Mr. Chen felt the air leave his lungs. It was her. There was no mistaking it now. The realization landed without drama but with weight. She had not simply survived, she had arrived. Lin Yao did not look for him. That was what unsettled him most.
She moved through the room with quiet confidence, greeting colleagues, exchanging measured words, her attention directed only where it mattered. She did not scan faces, she did not hesitate. She belonged there. Mr. Chen remained where he was, watching. The imbalance was unmistakable. People approached her, not the other way around. Conversations bent toward her presence, decisions formed around her input. She was no longer reacting to the environment, she was shaping it. Time passed without him realizing it. Then, without warning, their paths aligned. Not deliberately, not dramatically. They stood a short distance apart, close enough that acknowledgement became inevitable. Lin Yao turned. Their eyes met. The moment stretched. Her expression did not change. No surprise, no anger, no satisfaction, only recognition. She inclined her head slightly, a polite gesture, professional, neutral, as if greeting someone she barely knew. Mr. Chen attempted to respond, but his movement came a fraction too late. She had already turned away, attention redirected towards someone else. The exchange lasted less than a second. It felt longer. In that brief moment, Mr. Chen understood everything he needed to. She remembered him. She simply did not consider him important enough to address. The realization cut deeper than confrontation ever could. Around him, the conference continued. Conversations resumed. The world moved forward as if nothing significant had happened. But for Mr. Chen, nothing felt the same. He stood there, aware of his own stillness, watching Lin Yao speak with confidence he had never imagined she possessed, watching others respond to her as if her authority were unquestionable. This was not coincidence. This was not luck. This was consequence. Mrs. Chen noticed the change in her husband's posture, the tension in his jaw, the way his gaze remained fixed on a single point across the room. She followed his line of sight, and then she saw Lin Yao. Recognition struck her more slowly, but when it did, it left her breathless. That woman? Impossible. And yet there was no denying it. The conference ended without incident. No words were exchanged, no scenes were made, but the balance had shifted irrevocably. As the Chen family left the ballroom, surrounded by the noise of departing attendees, Mr. Chen felt something settle heavily in his chest. This was not a warning, this was confirmation. Lin Yao had returned to his world, not as someone seeking acknowledgement, but as someone who no longer needed it. And for the first time since the Chen family's decline began, Mr. Chen understood that what he was facing was not competition, it was reckoning. After the conference, the Chen family stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Recognition had arrived, and with it, urgency. Mr. Chen returned to the office with a renewed determination to reassert control. He reviewed contracts personally, questioned advisors more aggressively, pressed managers for faster results. For the first time in years, he involved himself in details he once delegated. At first, the response felt reassuring. Meetings were scheduled quickly, calls were returned sooner, reports arrived with extra explanations attached. But reassurance did not last, because effort did not produce results. Deals continued to stall. Decisions reached late stages only to dissolve without explanation. Partners who once deferred now hesitated openly. The Chen family tried to push back. They reached out to old allies, reminding them of past cooperation. They emphasized history, loyalty, shared success. The replies were polite, careful, non-committal. No one refused outright. No one committed either. That ambiguity was worse than rejection. Inside the company, resistance emerged in quieter forms. Managers became cautious. Employees hesitated before taking risks. Every decision was weighed twice, then delayed. Fear replaced confidence, and fear does not obey authority. Mr. Chen attempted to assert dominance in meetings, speaking more firmly, interrupting more often, demanding certainty where none existed. It had the opposite effect. People stopped offering ideas, conversations narrowed, innovation stalled, control slipped further. He could feel it. the sense that outcomes were no longer responding to effort, that pressure no longer produced movement. This was unfamiliar territory. For years, power had followed expectation. Influence had been exercised almost automatically. Now, every attempt to assert authority revealed its absence. Mrs. Chen noticed the change at home. Her husband was quieter, more irritable. He replayed conversations aloud, analyzing tone and implication. He slept less. At meals, the topic never strayed far from business. They both knew what had changed. Lin Yao. They did not speak her name often, but it hovered between them. The Chen family made a direct attempt to regain footing. They initiated a new partnership proposal, structured carefully, presented confidently. It was meant to demonstrate relevance, stability, strength. The response came days later, delayed, cautious, and ultimately declined. Not harshly, just enough. No explanation that could be challenged, no accusation that could be refuted. Only a quiet redirection. The message was clear. They were no longer the center of gravity. Mr. Chen reviewed the list of companies influencing the market now. New names, new players, new alliances. And there, woven through the shifts, was Lin Yao's presence. Not obvious, but consistent. He saw it in the timing, in the alignment, in the way decisions moved when she was involved. This was not sabotage, it was replacement. The Chen family still existed, still operated, still held meetings and signed contracts, but their decisions no longer shaped the environment. They reacted now, always a step behind. Mr. Chen felt the loss of control most acutely in moments of silence, when phones didn't ring, when confirmations didn't arrive, when authority failed to produce immediate compliance. These were not failures he could confront directly. There was no enemy to accuse, only the realization that influence had moved elsewhere, and that movement could not be forced back. The Chen family began to understand something deeply unsettling. Power had shifted without confrontation, without announcement, without permission. Lin Yao did not need to oppose them openly. She had simply become more relevant, and relevance, once lost, is almost impossible to reclaim. By the end of that period, the Chen family faced a truth they could no longer avoid. They were not being attacked, they were being outgrown. And in that realization lay the final loss of control. Because there is no strategy for fighting someone who does not need to fight you at all.
Pride does not collapse all at once. It resists. It reshapes itself, finds excuses, searches for dignity in compromise. For the Chen family, this was the most painful stage. They were no longer in denial, but they were not yet ready to surrender. Instead, they hovered in a space between certainty and fear, clinging to the belief that something could still be salvaged. Mr. Chen began making adjustments he never thought he would make. He softened his tone in meetings, chose his words more carefully, allowed others to speak longer without interruption. He told himself it was strategy, not concession. But those around him felt the difference. Authority, once instinctive, now asked for cooperation, and cooperation is not the same as control. Mrs. Chen suggested reaching out, not formally, not publicly, quietly. She framed it as relationship maintenance, a way to stabilize what remained, a chance to remind people of past goodwill. Mr. Chen resisted at first. He told himself it was unnecessary, that they were still respected, that this was only a temporary imbalance. But reality pressed in from all sides. Another proposal stalled, another meeting ended without commitment, another delay arrived without explanation. Each moment stripped away certainty, until finally resistance gave way to discomfort. They reached out to intermediaries first, former partners, mutual contacts, people who might carry messages without forcing acknowledgement. The responses came back slower than expected, when they came at all.
Those who responded did so cautiously, carefully choosing words, avoiding promises. No one spoke with urgency. No one acted as if helping the Chen family mattered. That realization landed heavily. It was not rejection, it was irrelevance. The family tried again, this time more directly. They prepared gifts, not extravagant, thoughtful, chosen to suggest respect rather than desperation. Mr. Chen hesitated before sending them. The hesitation itself told him everything. These gestures would have been unthinkable before. They sent them anyway. The gifts were returned, unopened, no explanation attached. That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Mr. Chen sat alone in his office that evening, staring at the space where the returned items had been placed. He did not touch them, he did not move them, he simply looked. For the first time, the possibility he had avoided fully settled in. They had lost leverage. Mrs. Chen felt it too. She moved through the house more slowly now. Conversations felt strained. Even familiar spaces felt uncertain. They spoke less at home. When they did speak, it was in fragments. What else can we do? Who else can we reach? How did it come to this? No one answered. The name they avoided began to surface more frequently. Lin Yao. Not spoken with anger, spoken with caution. She was no longer a possibility. She was a factor. Mr. Chen replayed the conference encounter again and again in his mind. The brief acknowledgement, the polite indifference, the way she had turned away without hesitation. That moment haunted him, not because it was dramatic, but because it was dismissive. It confirmed what he feared most. She did not need them, and need, once reversed, changes everything. Pride clung stubbornly. He told himself he could still negotiate, that position could still be regained, that respect could still be restored. But beneath those thoughts lay a growing awareness. They were no longer choosing their moves. They were reacting. That was the true loss. Desperation does not announce itself. It creeps in quietly. It shows up in second thoughts, in softened language, in the willingness to consider options once dismissed outright. By the end of that period, the Chen family stood at a threshold they had never imagined crossing. They could continue pretending, or they could admit what had become undeniable. Resistance had failed, and the next step would require something far more difficult than strategy. It would require humility. The kind they had once demanded from others, and now, for the first time, they would have to decide whether they were willing to offer it themselves. They waited. That alone would have been unthinkable once. The Chen family, who had always expected others to adjust to their schedules, now sat in silence, checking the time more than once, careful not to appear impatient. The lobby was spacious and bright, designed to impress, but it offered no comfort. People passed by without noticing them. That was the first humiliation. They had arrived early, not out of courtesy, but out of fear of missing their chance. When the receptionist informed them there would be a delay, they nodded in understanding, even offering a polite smile. Understanding was something they had never needed to show before. Minutes stretched. Mr. Chen sat upright, hands folded, posture controlled. Mrs. Chen kept her gaze forward, expression composed, though her fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say between them. When Lin Yao finally appeared, the space around her seemed to shift. She did not hurry. She walked with the same measured pace she used everywhere now, calm, unrushed, entirely in control of her time. She stopped a short distance away. The Chen family stood. The movement was automatic, instinctive. That was the second humiliation. Lin Yao looked at them evenly. Her expression was neutral, professional, devoid of emotion. She did not pretend familiarity. She did not acknowledge history. She waited. That silence was deliberate. It forced them to speak first. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. He began carefully, choosing words meant to preserve dignity. He spoke of misunderstandings, of circumstances, of the way things had changed unexpectedly. He spoke as if this were a negotiation between equals. Lin Yao listened without interruption. Mrs. Chen spoke next. Her tone was softer. She appealed to shared history, to familiarity, to time. She did not mention the night Lin Yao was thrown out. She did not need to. The omission spoke loudly enough. When they finished, Lin Yao remained silent for a moment longer. Then she spoke, not sharply, not loudly, calmly. She acknowledged what they said without agreeing. She clarified facts without accusation. She corrected assumptions without condescension. Every sentence was precise. She did not raise the past. She did not need to. Mr. Chen felt the conversation slipping. He adjusted. The language shifted. What had begun as explanation became request. What had been framed as discussion became appeal. And then, finally, the truth surfaced. They needed her. Not for reconciliation, not for closure, for survival. The word was never spoken. It didn't have to be. The room understood. Mr. Chen lowered his voice. He apologized, not eloquently, not perfectly, but sincerely enough to reveal how far he had fallen to be saying it at all. He acknowledged mistakes, decisions, consequences. Mrs. Chen followed. Her voice trembled only slightly. She asked for understanding, for leniency, for mercy. The word hovered between them, heavy and exposed. Lin Yao listened. Her expression did not change. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. She did not accuse them. She did not demand apologies. She stated one simple truth. They had thrown her out with nothing. She had survived. She had built something on her own, something they now needed. She paused. The silence pressed down on them. Then she continued. She told them she did not owe them mercy, not because she was cruel, but because mercy was not a debt. It was a choice, and she had already made hers. She would not interfere with their decline. She would not rescue them from it. She would not pretend the past could be undone. The Chen family absorbed her words slowly. There was no argument left, no leverage, no illusion of equality. This was not revenge. This was reality. Mr. Chen lowered his head, not dramatically, just enough. That was the moment everything ended. Lin Yao stood. The meeting was over. She did not linger. She did not look back. As she walked away, the Chen family remained where they were, surrounded by light, exposed in a way they had never experienced before. They had begged, and they had been refused, not with anger, with certainty. That certainty was what broke them, because it left no space for hope, no space for appeal, only the weight of consequences they could no longer escape. After that meeting, Lin Yao did not think about the Chen family again. Not immediately. She returned to her day, to her schedule, to the rhythm of a life that had long stopped revolving around them. Meetings followed one another, decisions were made, messages were answered. Nothing felt dramatic, and that was how she knew it was truly over. The moment she had imagined for so long did not bring triumph. It did not bring relief in the way she once expected. It brought quiet, a deep, steady quiet that settled inside her and stayed. That evening, it rained, not heavily, not violently, just enough to soften the edges of the city. Lin Yao stood by the window of her apartment and watched the streets below glisten under the lights. People moved beneath umbrellas, cars passed slowly. Life continued, indifferent to endings and beginnings alike. The memory returned, uninvited. The night she was thrown out, the cold rain, the closed gate, the weight of nothing in her hands. For a long time after that night, the memory had felt sharp. It cut into her thoughts without warning. It followed her into sleep and lingered when she woke. Now it felt distant, not erased, integrated. She realized something then. The past did not lose its power because she confronted it. It lost its power because she outgrew it. Lin Yao no longer defined herself by what had been taken from her. She defined herself by what she had built. And what she had built did not come from revenge. It came from endurance, from silence, from learning when to step forward and when to remain still. She thought of the woman she had been, the one who believed patience meant submission, the one who mistook being tolerated for being accepted, the one who stood quietly at the edge of rooms hoping to be seen. She did not feel anger toward that version of herself, only understanding. That woman had survived long enough for this one to exist. There was no grand lesson to announce, no message to deliver, just a simple truth she carried with her now. Being thrown out with nothing had stripped away everything that was not essential. What remained was her ability to observe, her ability to endure, her ability to decide. Lin Yao turned away from the window and moved through her apartment, the space familiar and calm. Each object had been chosen deliberately. Nothing was excessive, nothing was borrowed. Her life belonged to her. Somewhere else in the city, the Chen family would be adjusting to a future they never expected. They would remember her differently now, not as the quiet woman they dismissed, but as the consequence they could not escape. She did not wish them harm, she did not wish them well. She simply did not wish them at all. That, she understood, was freedom. Later that night, as the rain faded into mist, Lin Yao prepared for sleep. She moved without urgency. There was no sense of waiting for the next moment. Tomorrow would come, and she would meet it on her own terms. The story that began with a closed gate and an empty road did not end with applause. It ended with balance, with a woman who had nothing taken from her anymore, because there was nothing left for anyone else to claim. She had been thrown out with nothing, and in building everything herself, she had ensured that no one would ever have the power to do that to her again.